And we're back.
We are.
This is part 3 of our examining the Macron presidency for non-French people.
And our baby has been behaving so well, is really invested in us sharing these insights because this siesta is glorious.
Yes. Very nice. So getting back where we left with the Macron project for pension reform. So starting with the end, the pension reform is currently on hold. It was put on hold by the COVID crisis. It was the object of 2 months of intensive protests and strikes. So from in December 2019 and January 2020. And it was meant to be discussed and voted in the new parliamentary session from 2020, but then COVID happened, and as we know, it was a bit of its own issue.
As we mentioned before, this was following through you. It was scandalous. Like the secretary was part of 5 different think tanks. 13 different. No, then it was 5,000 euros a month.
Yes, exactly.
That he was getting from the different from his participation in the different think tanks.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. That's.
And these think tanks were not, let's say. Think tanks for the advancement of human knowledge. No, it was not just to further the human understanding of pension macroeconomics, but it was actually think tanks driven by Blackstone and by some of the BlackRock, sorry,
yeah,
and some of the major power holders,
yeah, exactly,
in the world of
big
insurance
and big French insurance company. Yes, absolutely. So. As I said last time, one of the motivations for the pension reform is mostly to lower the cost of pension for state and to save money.
So basically, let me try to summarize very quickly what I have understood of this model that's called the Swedish model. No, that is that the state lowers its contribution to the final pension. So let's say 400 euros or something like that. No, let's say something that is just very barely and below probably a living cost or just barely. And then private citizens will contribute to private funds, pension funds, and with whatever you have contributed, if the money that you've saved, that will turn into how much money do you get from your pension fund once you retire.
Yeah, exactly. So the idea would be to transition from the current French model of pension that guaranteed by the states and are based on redistribution from taxes on the workforce to a partially privatized system.
What is the basic pension in France at the moment?
It's complicated because you have a lot of different statuses.
I guess you have, like in Spain, a non-contributive pension, so that will be kind of the lowest one. So if you haven't contributed to the pension market, and then probably a minimum pension.
Yeah, I would say the very lowest that we have right now, it's short of 800, 900 euros. But again, I'm really not sure about that because it can be contingent.
Okay.
And for example,
but in this new scenario, probably what we're talking is lowering that to a 500. What I was saying, no, a 500, 600, or the equivalent when this pension takes into place.
Yeah, exactly. And again, the long story short is again that there is no financial need for that because currently the French system is working, is financially sustainable because in the political discourse they've decided that we need to reform the pension system and people need to work longer because otherwise there's going to be a deficit in the pension fund. Again, this has been thoroughly debunked by independent political institutes.
That's probably part of the analysis of Piketty, when he analyzes the wealth gaps, and he
Yeah,
analyzed how the middle high class have become more high or have been amassing more wealth,
yeah,
and
absolutely.
a larger portion of the middle class have been kind of a middle low class have been left with less means, no,
Yeah,
to
exactly.
comparatively.
What Piketty underlines is that capital is going to exponentially be more and more concentrated because it's the nature of capital, and this is why state redistribution is so important.
And if I got it correctly, also wealth, the tax on wealth and on the higher classes have been also been sliced or reduced over time, as 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 the wealth, the accumulated wealth of the biggest families has been increasing, not even linearly, no, but exponentially.
Yeah, absolutely. So the pension reform is still a very contentious subject because it's part of so it was put on hold because of the COVID crisis, but it was written in Emmanuel Macron's program
But
for his second presidency.
you're going too fast to this is that this is part, because I want to share that from the Spanish point of view. So from the Spanish media, I was following up the political news from Spain, even though we're emigrated. Every day, and they were mentioning these demonstrations against the reform and so on, but how they were framing it was, well, the Secretary of Pensions seems to have been part of some think tanks, and the extreme left is making a huge deal out of it. That was how the left-leaning or center-left-leaning media in Spain was framing it. So me having the other story from your side of, no, he's making 5,000 euros a month. He's been in 13 different commissions, and he's saying that he doesn't see any problem on this, because he was saying that for almost a month, or at least 3 weeks or something like that, until it was untenable, right?
Yeah, no, that's generally the Macronist answer to anything that can look like a conflict of interest, and there are quite a number of those. It's like, yeah, I'm sitting in all those boards, and I work in this specific sector, and some big actors of this sector were my former employees, but it just means that I know the field very well, and that I'm very qualified to do it. Conflict of interest? What conflict of interest? Absolutely not.
Of course not.
Not possible. Doesn't exist.
And then they tried to sip it in during the first confinement, right? I remember that during the first confinement, there were these demonstrations before the confinement, very heavy demonstrations in the middle of. I remember that winter was was right before the explosion of the epidemic of the pandemic, but it was a tough-ish winter, and people was still demonstrating daily and keeping a very, which is usually winters are the killers of demonstrations.
Yeah, exactly. Right? It goes to show how strong that is. That, like I said, it was almost 2 full months of constant demonstration in
January and February, the hardest months.
Yeah, January and February, so heart of the winter, and to show how bad it was. So at the end of February, so right before COVID exploded, there was to be a special minister council, so government meeting. To discuss the COVID crisis and to discuss the sanitary measures, but when the minister council was gathered, they found out that the purpose was not to discuss the COVID situation, but instead to discuss
how to push the pension.
Yeah, exactly, and to use
policy forth.
Yeah, exactly, and to use a French constitutional demonstration that allows the government to force pass
French constitutional power, no,
yeah,
special powers that will allow them to
force push a law, and so instead of discussing COVID, while it was really starting to become a source of
explode,
concern,
yeah.
the discussion was how can we force past this law that everyone is against and that people have been protesting against for 2 months straight. So that's it's an interesting sense of priorities, is what I say.
It got paused. No, I think an important bit now. I would like to go back to the time when I was younger and I was more. And I was more positive about Macron. An important bit to talk as well is that when he speaks in English, he will do a fabulous Minister of Exteriors in a way. He has been relatively positive. His influence in the international arena or in Europe, let's say, I wouldn't dare to have an opinion on his influence on post-colonial countries in La Francophonie, but in Europe at least, and in the arena with the States, I think that his stances has been relatively net positive and has been on a rallying cry of let's unite Europe, let's unite into institutions that are stronger in Europe, and that we can have more stronger stances and more strategic impact together.
Yeah, that's something I would definitely grant him, is that in international policy and in the French constitution, international policy is one of the reserved powers of the president. So it's the president and only the president who is in charge of it. And yes, he's definitely be good in that, because he's one of our first president that is really internationally minded and who.
It's one of the first presidents that speak English.
Yeah, in particular, and he also has a very strong Europeist pro Europe position. That's one of the things he was elected for, and yeah, I dare say in terms of political representation abroad, he's been rather good, and he's also milked it a lot for political communication and political gain. But yeah, that's another point.
So Amor, he has 2 points, but it seems like he was really hated by a lot of the left and by a lot of the center left by the end of his presidency, of his first tenure as a president. So what else were the highlights of why that hate?
So what happened? Well, I think so first, a lot of the hate comes from the very neoliberal policy that was made. So the situation was already bad, but it has gone from bad to worst, especially for the health sector, for the education sector that has been more and more dismantled. Macron has also very much been criticized for his climate inaction. France actually has been condemned in international tribunals for climate inaction, and one of the objectives of the Macron presidency was to have a strong climate law. But in the end, since he didn't want to go against private business interest, France is really lagging in terms of carbon reduction objectives, and again has been condemned for that. What happened politically is that after his election, the socialists were only 6%, and Macron realized that he already had taken the biggest part of the neoliberal socialist. So to consolidate his power and his electoral base, he had to go right, because there was nothing more to take on the left, but there were electorate on the right. So he has veered right, and generally now, because originally he was saying that he was centrist, center left. But now he's really veered right, and is considered a right-wing president. And one of the way he accomplished that, and which is what you do when you're part of the right bloc in France, is to double down on security, authority, and fighting against immigration.
I remember. Sorry, going back to the pensions. I remember that you told me at some point that one of the first things that they did when they were when the demonstrations against the pension reform started, was to secure the pension stability for the police.
Yes, exactly.
Right? So he actually nailed that one and said, no, but your pensions are going to be fine. Don't worry.
Yeah, exactly. So in a very telling decision, when the pension reform was discussed and drafted, the police were out of it. So they would keep their current pension system. They would not have to go under the new system, which is again very telling, because if it was such a positive and necessary pension reform, why would you keep a whole profession out of it, but especially a profession that you need?
And we're talking that this happened at the tail end of the Yellow Vest movement, when the Yellow Vest movement as well had been very, very terrible in regard of the direction that the police were given to repress the Yellow Vest. So I think personally I would not blame the police for the policies, but the policy makers or the direction setters that was really on this needs to end, right? And violence and aggression is allowed. People died during the Yellow Vest movement, right? And
yes, there were some death ruled accidents, but still people and so there were some deaths. There were a lot of people that were wounded and mutilated. Lifelong mutilations. Including in some cases people who were not even part of the protest, that were just caught in the crossfire. And so, and again, to be complete, this did not start with Macron, because the socialist government also used police repression a lot. But it certainly got worse against Macron. And again, like you said, it's not a matter of individual policemen, because it's also a very difficult job, and we can agree on that. But from a structural point of view, they have what has been called a grey check, meaning that they are not directly instructed to beat up people, but they are just being told, you need to disperse the protesters by any means necessary, and at some point there is a bit of impunity against this violence, because there is an institution that is supposed to investigate police violence, but condemnation are very, very, very rare.
So if I remember correctly, what you're saying, that it started before, let's say, just not to go too far to the past, but I remember from our conversations that with Holland, we had the terrible incidents of the attacks, of the terrorist attacks. In Marseille and in Paris, in Paris, the Charlie Hebdo attacks and so on, and so those were those the ones that enable the state of exception on security on security.
Yeah, exactly. So after 2015, we had specific laws, anti-terrorist law to manage security while the terror attacks were being investigated, and it was a state of emergency law. So it was supposed to be temporary, but it gave police and investigators a lot of power to be able to investigate. But when Macron became president, it was supposed to the restrictions on state of emergency was supposed to be lifted.
And some of it got codified into law.
It was voted into the common law. So we have basically exceptional power that were given to the police. And again, this is very enabling for abuse to happen.
So we're talking a bit of potentially a semi-equivalent to the Patriot Act in the States.
That's a good parallel.
Great. So what do we have to get to the end of Macron's presidency?
And
to his hair.
Yeah. So this is the main thing. In general, Macron was elected as a pragmatic liberal with progressive leanings. He ended up being a very classic neoliberal with a very authoritarian approach to protest repression, with police violence being significantly shocking for a lot of people, and of course a lot of small sentences on provocation, like finding a job is easy. You should I can just cross the street and find you a job. One that I find particularly relevant is
that one was an old man coming to him and
not an old man, a young 30 something unemployed, explaining that he couldn't find a job in his chosen profession, and they say, well, just go into construction restaurant or hotel. I could just cross the street and find you a job.
Great.
Yeah, and one that's also very, very telling. So once he was inaugurating a new train station, and he said, I quote, "A station is where successful people and people who are nothing meet."
What?
In a station, meet successful people and people who are nothing.
In a train station.
In a train station, you meet people. Fantastic. You meet people who are successful and people who are nothing.
Great.
Yeah, this one was also very shocking. We could also discuss about how his discourse went more and more to the right. So with
that's a bit of a Napoleon syndrome, no? I have the sense that when he looks at himself in the morning, he really likes seeing himself as the modern Bonaparte.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and the way his party works, which is totally centered around his person, the political program is secondary. This is very Bonapartist. There's definitely an affiliation here. So with that, Macron got more and more reviled, but the problem was that there was no real alternative, and he sort of waltzed toward the re-election with very little opposition. Maybe we'll discuss it some other time. And getting back to Macron's hair, because
so we're ending Macron's story.
Yes, we're ending Macron's story because we can continue, but when we'll discuss the far right and the new left some other time. But this is more or less it. Again, there are other things that should be discussed, especially how in reincorporated some of the far right discourse. He leaned to the right, so a lot of his talking points moved to the right and to the conservative right with the defense of Catholic talking.
But tell me about his hair.
So his hair. So my leftist Twitter is really going very hard on Macron's hair. And I would say my leftist Twitter sometimes has a point, because they've dug up pictures from 2017, 2018, where he's clearly had, the sort of gaping holes to the side. I
perfectly know what you're talking about.
and if you look at recent pictures, however, he has this sort of very straight hairline, and with a sort of very compact weight of hair.
You mean that he wears a wig, or that he has a Turkish job done?
That's the issue. A lot of people are leaning towards wig, because sometimes also his hair implantation changes from picture to picture, so that he might have had some wigs and changed them at some point. Turkish hair implantation treatment is not impossible,
and
but it is an open subject. But that something was done, I think definitely.
Important in this podcast, we don't shame anyone for doing aesthetic jobs that will help them feel more attuned with themselves, but we punch up to power. That's that's definitely part of the spirit.
Yes, no, absolutely. The real issues with Macron are about his politics, not his hair, but it's still funny to make fun of.
Great. So, Amor, the good thing is that La France en Marche is no more.
Oh, yes.
Now we have
A new hobby.
Renaissance.
Yes.
And we'll talk about it in another.
Yes, political rebranding, but yeah, let's not forget. The new party names need to be perfume names for some reason.
Renaissance by
Yes.
Macron.